And now, episode 3, Escape from Vacation World, the book that's coming. Here it goes.
Okay, so this is where we start. As Bailey waves goodbye, a nervous Joelle seems to find comfort holding her old Colt 45 pistol like a small kitten. She never blinks or takes her eyes off them as they enter the passenger side of the large E350 Ford 2007 white 14-passenger van. Joelle hopes she made the right decision to let Bailey go with them. She clearly did not trust them and wondered why Bailey did. Despite all of this, she stood poised to rescue her at a drop of a hat. Captain John takes the driver's seat as Dean shuffles over to the passenger seat, holding tightly to his chest some manila folders overstuffed with unknown documents. As the vehicle drives off, Bailey's nose picks up an odd odor that seems to linger in the air. She takes a short guarded sniff and notices that the smell seems to be emanating from the back end of the van. She turns around and notices the absence of all 3 rows of seats and in its place an assortment of nets, hooks, ropes with strands of dark hair embedded in the apparatus itself. Dean turns around and says to Bailey, "Sorry about the smell. We'll explain later." After 10 minutes of driving and no talking, they pull into a wooded area away from the lake's view. Bailey's getting a little uncomfortable with this as she says, "I thought we were going to the boat." "No, love," says John gently. "You assume that. We need to show you how we're going to go back to Notlim first to rescue the others." As they enter the cabin, she notices that the place is in a bad shape, needed both paint, wallpaper, and assorted other repairs. The place looks mostly empty with the exception of the kitchen area that has been generously littered with assorted boxes of cereal, soda, and beer, sitting conspicuously on the kitchen counter. This place could clearly use a woman's touch, she thinks to herself. But not today. At least not this woman. She hears the sound of a growl coupled with a strange, odd type of weeping. Almost like a puppy locked up in another room, missing her mother. Her curiosity is betrayed by her facial expressions as John notices this too. He turns to Dean to ask him to step outside and check around. Make sure the area is secure. Dean, unaccustomed to taking direction, pivots his eyes to him sternly as John's eyes soften and his face gives way to a small smile of please. Bailey takes notice of this as she looks away from him directly, but still very carefully following his movements with her peripheral vision. Dean turns his back on them and strolls over to the window and pulls the curtains closed before he leaves. Her eye catches a quick reflection of a pistol just inside his pants, tightly tucked to his belly. Bailey gets a chill as Dean finishes closing the other curtains to the room. This room quickly darkens to a variation of shades of gray. She suddenly feels at risk and quickly looks over to the terrain for an escape route or a weapon to use just in case. Bailey carefully strides into the kitchen under the curious eyes of Captain John as he stops looking at her and turns around to join Dean by the windows as they both finish securing the curtains and occasionally peering through them. Her eyes once again hears that strange animal sound coming from the other room just outside the kitchen. She moves slowly over to that room and carefully shadows the wall, hoping to stay out of sight. Dean and John are both preoccupied with the windows looking outside in conversation and never notices her movement. She slowly opens the door and moves just inside the doorway, carefully putting herself out of their sight. Her nose is again hammered with the smell from the van, but only stronger. Carefully, she moves her head inside to get a look. The room is very dark with dim lights as her eyes slowly become accustomed to the dark. She almost lets out a gasp as she is taken back at the sight of a large, hairy-type ape cowering in the corner and hiding his face and whimpering. Without realizing it or expecting it to come out of her mouth, she suddenly feels a deep sense of compassion for this poor beast and exhales the word softly, "Oh my." Suddenly, the beast becomes aware of her as it ferociously leaps at her, only to be stopped by an unseen barrier. The 60-year-old woman falls backward on her back and lets out a scream. Her eyes open wide to see that the beast continues to react violently to her presence. He let out another roar that is both frightening and deafening to this senior citizen as she pulls herself to her feet and using the door handle to do so. Suddenly, two arms reach into the room just beyond the threshold and pulls her out of the room. The door is quickly shut as both Dean and John verbally pound her with reproof. "What are you doing in there? You're trying to get yourself killed?" screams Dean as John says not a word but exhales in relief. And there we have What Did She See? Let's take a look and there it is, folks. There's that big hairy beast and there's her looking through the door. The beast continues to roar and pound on the invisible wall as Bailey points at the beast and says, "Did you see that? What is that?" "Calm down, Miss Wilder. Calm down," urges John as he gently places his hands on her shoulder. Dean turns to John and says, "John, you better gas him and put him back to sleep. We don't need him in this heightened state of anxiety. I don't want to overtax those security devices." "At once," says John as he leaves the room, and Dean and Bailey follow him out of the room as far as the living room. Dean turns to Bailey and says, "We'll explain all this to you in a few minutes, but first, relax. Let me get you something to drink. Water, coffee, tea?" Bailey shakes her head delicately at the choices and says unapologetically, "Scotch." Without hesitation, Dean says with bravado, "Scotch it is." John returns to the room and places a small metal canister on the empty, dusty bookcase along the wall. Dean rolls his eyes to John to escort her to the muddy-colored leather sofa as he makes his way to the kitchen. "Are we okay, Miss Wilder?" asks John with apprehension. She nods yes as Dean returns from the kitchen and hands her a plastic red cup with a shot of scotch and an ice cube. She looks over to John and says, "Is everything all right now with our friend in the next room?" "He should be. He seems to be calming as the gas filled the room. I think he just might go back to sleep." Dean goes back to the kitchen and returns with a can of beer for himself and John. She looks up at Dean and at John and says with a quaking voice at a measured tone, "Do you want to tell me what's going on and why we have a big gorilla locked up in the room over there?" A twinkle in John's blue eyes that were both striking and the bluest eyes Bailey had ever seen almost made her forget the question. In this dim light, he reminded Bailey of an old English teacher she had when he was in grade school, whom she was madly in love with, at least as much as an 8-year-old could be. Both of these qualities in John created a type of vulnerability in her, but she would never admit to anyone. She looks at him pondering the thought of romance for just a second as he takes a swallow from his drink. Bailey quickly dispels the notion, but can't seem to stop her eyes from staring at him. John's eyes sharpen professionally, as he says unaffectedly by her momentary infatuation. Miss Wilder, that was Bigfoot. He's the one that brought you back home to Earth. What? How can you say that? Is that what he said? I didn't think Bigfoot could talk. Can he talk? Asked Bailey in befuddlement. No, of course not. He doesn't communicate like we do, answers John lethargically. Then how can you say he brought me here? Bailey reiterates with inflection. Perhaps I can't be positive, but I would venture to call it an educated guess. An educated guess stirs Bailey uneasily with the whole thought. John folds his hands within each other as he becomes uneasy with these questions. He quickly composes himself and says tiredly, Bigfoot, that we have here is... Never mind, says John. It's really not important. Bailey shakes her head and says, I think it is, Captain John. I still don't understand why you have him here and how he's going to help us get back to Notlim and rescue the others. I thought we were going to go back the way we first did, with the yacht. Captain John Leroy Seaford looks downward and says, We can't. The gateway and all the other points of entry have been destroyed, answers John with respite. I don't understand. Then how are we going to get back there? Concludes Bailey with completely mystified. John looks at Dean as the two men contemplate by glance whether they should just tell her straight out or keep it vague. Dean looks at John and realizes they don't have that kind of time. He nods to John, who focuses his full attention on her, smiles warmly, and puts his hand on top of Bailey's hand. He takes a deep breath and looks her in both eyes and says carefully, That's where Bigfoot and you come in. Bailey looks stunned at him as he moves his fingers up to her wrist to the plain yellow strap still around her wrist. Have you tried to become timeout again? Bailey looks at him confused as she shakes her head. No. How could I? My superhero wristband is dead. It's only a worthless strap now. I just keep it as a memento. We were told that the devices would not function here on Earth. Dean speaks up seriously and says, In most cases, Miss Wilder, that would be true. But not in your case. Your matrix is much different from the others. While you can't be timeout in the true sense of freezing time and running as fast as a cheetah here on Earth, you're still special. Bailey becomes astonished at this as Dean speaks up pointing to her. You see, you and our friend in the other room are going to dimension jump us back to Notlim with all of us. All of us are going back. You must trust us with this. We know what we are doing. Bailey's eyes frown in shock as she says, So what are you talking about? You're saying Bigfoot is going to take us back to Notlim with a dimension jump? Are you crazy? How do you expect to pull that off? He doesn't seem like the cooperative type. You're right, Miss Wilder. He's not. But trust me when I say this. We have a way to convince him. He will understand and cooperate. Believe me, he wants to get back there too. Notlim is his home too. Dean steps forward and pulls a series of photographs from the folder and shows them to her. Bailey looks at the 5 pictures of different angles of the same picture. The picture of another Bigfoot on the planet Notlim and with the 5 suns in the background. I don't know, boys. That's quite a stretch. How do you know it will work? Says Bailey. Pictures of him and Notlim's son. You sure it's going to work? It will work, says John with certainty. But how can you really know? Asked Bailey, still sporting reluctance. Dean and John again look intensely at each other, as if trying to decide what to say next. John's face tightens and his lips soften as he slowly mouths the words, because we know, trust us. Bailey's intuition tells her that they are both still keeping something from her and are hesitant to mention it. She replies candidly, I'm afraid I don't believe you or even trust you. I'm sorry. Maybe it's the best thing we just take me home and forget the whole thing. Dean jumps up from the table angrily and catches himself in striking the table. Without saying a word, he marches hurriedly out of the room and into another room, and angrily kicks the door open with the living room, and with rage throws himself into a big lazy boy chair by the front door in rage. Bailey stands up and is ready to leave with such a display of drama, but is hesitant in walking past Dean. She looks at John for help and direction and is astonished to see John dropping his head and muttering something to himself that she can't make out. He slowly lifts his head, weakly opens his moist eyes to her, and says with a whisper, I'm very disappointed in you, dear. I thought you really loved your daughter and your husband, that you would do anything to help them. But I guess I was wrong. And now, Bailey sits back down with both curiosity and trepidation and says in a suspicious, low tone, That's pretty dirty of you, John. That's a terrible thing to say. Yes, it is, Bailey, but don't let that be true. Help us to help them, John pleads with melancholy in his voice. Bailey starts to cry, but quickly stops herself as she lowers her head and buries her face in her hand. John knows he has her on the edge of breaking down. John knows that is not the time to let up. After all, there is so much at stake in this that he knows he can't afford to go soft now. John continues with kind and persistent manners, hoping to get her to cooperate. Bailey, think. It's been 7 days since you and your family left Notlim. 1 week Earth time. Do you remember what Brady told you about the proposition he made to you all? That you wouldn't be gone that long? Remember he said only 1 hour? Only 1 hour. Do you remember that? Do you also remember how long 1 hour Earth time was compared to Notlim? Bailey raises her head slowly, wipes her eyes as another tear eludes her hand and drops conspicuously to the ground below. She looks up briefly at his eyes as he continues. 1 hour was equal to 30 days in Notlim. Remember, Bailey, think about this. A 24-hour day is the equivalent to 2 years in Notlim. Bailey, it's been 7 days now. That's 14 years your husband and daughter and the others have been trapped in Notlim. Do you understand? 14 years. And this is where we'll stop, as we will start the next episode.